Bueno, igual probemos. ¿Tú puedes escuchar el Zoom?
No.
¿No?
No.
No, ven, intento yo. Es que creo que no me metieron de co-host, pero ya estoy pidiendo. Por eso es que no me estaba. Sí.
Recording in progress.
Wait.
Tú le pasas, después cambia por favor.
Hola. Sorry, we are doing some tests, but we're gonna start in a few minutes. Okay, it's ready.
So, ready. Okay, cool.
Please, you need to point to
That way.
that way.
Not that way.
Not that way because then
Yeah.
it doesn't break.
Sure, sure, sure.
Thank you.
Are we timed up?
They're in charge. It's 2 o'clock.
I don't know.
Trying to do our intro.
2 months. Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay.
Here, takes the pictures.
Oh, it's good. It's good. Are you back on the door or you after things? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Kia ora, everyone. I keep holding this to my like it's going to make it louder in the room, but it's really just for the people that are online. So if I'm not talking loud enough at the back, just wave let us know. So welcome to this session on Indigenous data provenance, local context and the care principles. This is kind of part 2. I see some of you were here this morning and there's some new people as well, so that's great. It's a bit of a continuation of the symposium. There's a few presentations which people will do, and we'll just do some questions around that after that. And then there's a we want those questions then to roll into a bit more generally about local context, and we've got some of the local context team members here who can then share some of the resources that have been developed to support their uptake and use. At some point, we're going to end up with some slides here. And when that happens, then I'll carry on with the introductions. But if the local context people can just put their hands up and wave, just look around, you can see who they are. Been really great. Hey. Okay. All right, I'm pointing the clicker in the direction I was told to, and nothing's happening. So this is, in some ways, this ends up being a little bit of a continuation of the keynote that was yesterday, which Lydia Jennings gave. There's been a lot of discussion around what is happening in terms of Indigenous data governance and the care principles. In the session earlier, they talked about the care data maturity model. When we put these together, the abstracts that came in, some of them were examples of groups that we had been working with, developing projects, and other ones were just things that related to the context as well. So, is this thing gonna up? Are we working? Oh, okay. A little bit longer. So, in the meantime, are there any questions that people have from session 1? Any kind of burning things or thoughts or ideas? Oh, here we go. All right. Okay. All right. So here's our agenda for today. We've got the introduction. We'll have the 3 presentations, and then we'll go into the kind of questions. So I think which is supposed to be here. Make it happen. You will be talk number 4. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. We'll make that happen. All right. Now that we've revised the agenda, this is really how and why the labels came about. In part because of some of the problems that have been talked about, both yesterday by Lydia, but even today by Sabine. Some of the struggles in getting recognition for Indigenous rights and interests and data that's being collected off their land. And so in terms of dealing with that, the TK labels were developed to act as an intervention, something that can go and make sure that that information and material can be included in the record. And over time, we've ended up in a situation where now local context has become an NGO as a way of sort of attracting funding and being able to advance the activities across the globe. And when I mean across the globe, it's operating in 34 countries, primarily around sort of US and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, partly because of the English language nature of it, but also that being the place where a lot of these sort of holding institutions are. But you'll see that there's increasing interest from communities here within Latin America and moving into other parts of the world as well. And so this was really the sorts of things that we were responding to. The fact that all Indigenous communities have all of this sort of information and data about them and their territories, which is sitting in institutions all around the world. Universities, museums, all sorts of places, which is holding that material. Often that material doesn't have their names associated with it or the names of the particular people. So that provenance information is missing, and as it's being reused by other people, it's been excluded from the records going forward. They're not the rights holders. That's important when thinking about whether or not tools like Creative Commons and licenses are something that can be applied by communities. So they're only applied by the copyright holder, and that's typically the researcher or the institution. And this isn't just dealing with the collections that have been put together over decades and decades, but the fact that there's so much more research that's happening now. So we're generating data all the time and putting it into spaces. So that's what really local context was designed to deal with. There's a couple of things, a couple of terms that you'll hear: labels and notices, and there's an important distinction between them. Labels, and if you see labels anywhere, should have been put there by communities. So they're designed to be applied by communities themselves. If you see notices are really disclosures that have been made by the researchers or the institutions that just say there are Indigenous interests associated with this material. We don't necessarily know what they are. It's up for the community to say what the nature of that is, but we're acknowledging that it's sitting there. And so the labels give communities an opportunities to add additional information to the record, specifically around things like provenance. Where authority might sit in relation to that material, protocols, if there's protocols around how they should be used, and then permissions as well. And here's some sort of different examples where the labels have been applied. There's a Waiata Act there, which came from our community. There's a community that made documentaries about traditional knowledge from their islands, and they applied labels to that film. And so it can exist both in digital environments but in physical environments as well. Anywhere where that knowledge might be shared. And here you'll see the two sets of labels that have been developed. Traditional knowledge labels that relate to any essentially traditional knowledge that's been shared into places. And so if we think about a lot of the biodiversity research that takes place, it may be collecting traditional knowledge. So the protocols that might be relate to how that gets shared could be different from the science data that's being collected in the same project. And often that material will sometimes sit in the same place, but often it gets shared into different. I keep giving myself, I've only got 1 minute left. We had technical difficulties. I should have a little bit longer. Oh, I'm going to be finished in 1 minute, but then there's no time for Corey's part. And so notice is really, as I was mentioning before, that's the responsibility of institutions or researchers to say that's here. They're an important mechanism though, because in making them available, we're changing the sort of the digital infrastructure, which then allows the labels to come into play. And so even working to put in place something that allows the labels to be operationalized is useful in this endeavor. And so there's different notices which you'll get a sense of as we go through. One of them is an engagement notice, so that's just inviting communities to work with you around this sort of activity. And the other ones are the disclosure notices, which I know talked about before. I won't even get to the collection care notices, but just really collaborations with different institutions around how things how protocols of care get reflected. So I'm going to hand over to Corey, my co-partner in this activity.
I'm going to run through these really quickly. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Rowe. I'm the Director of Programs with Local Context. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a settler based on Wappinger and Pawcatuck Homelands in SoCal, Connecticut. Just want to run through some of the resources related to local context that we have. So we do have a bunch of different working groups and networks. The networks are regional. The working groups are based around communities of practice. You're welcome to join as many as is relevant to you. We do have sign-up sheets on the side of the room. There's also sign up online, so please feel free, whatever works for you, to sign up. We also created a comic in collaboration with the Shinnecock Nation, the New York Botanic Gardens. We have some copies of those here as well, so please come and take some. We don't really want to carry them back, but we'd love for you to share them with folks at your institution or your community. We also have a couple of short films available on our website, and they are captioned in English and in Spanish, including one with Maui's community, Whakapohia, as well as with the Penobscot Nation. So urge you to check that out. We're not sure if we're going to have a ton of time to talk about the hub today, but we encourage you to check out our hub tutorial videos, and also to sign up for sessions so we can talk through the hub together. This is our website where you can apply labels as a community or where you can generate notices as an institution. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie Lee.
Oh, very professional. Okay. All right. And a clicker. Wow, wow, wow. All right. Get my PowerPoint going. In the meantime, kia ora, ko Katie Lee toku ingoa, ko rongo whakaata toku iwi. So, okay, ko Katie Lee Riddle toku ingoa, ko rongo whakaata toku iwi. So my name is Katie Lee. I'm from Rongo Whakaata tribe on the east coast of New Zealand. And I'm here to talk to you today about the collaboration between the Periodic Table of Food Initiative and local context. So I've worked with the Periodic Table of Food Initiative for the last 9 months. I sit on their ABS and Ethics Expert Council. I've had a relationship with local context for the past 5 years, and that has been partially through my role at Te Kotahi Research Institute with my boss, Maui. So I'm related to everybody. So the Periodic Table of Food Initiative is a decentralized system of networks with the goal of sequencing the world's edible biodiversity in a fair, responsible, and equitable way. And they really want to know the composition of food in a broad sense. So if there is an edible food that we have a relationship with as people, PTFI want to know about it. And specifically, if you'd like to hear more about the actual work that PTFI does, we've got some other talks going on, and we've got some posters up there with the times and locations of our talks. But today, I'm just going to be talking about our data governance initiative. So for us, there's a huge amount of variety in the edible biodiversity in the food systems around the world, and that includes within Indigenous territories. And so our centers of excellence are based all around the world, and together they act as data collectors, which collect and sequence data and put it in our one big database. And so with a high level of international collaboration comes a really clear need to have clear expectations around the rights, responsibilities, and the ways in which we engage with data. So particularly, we've been trying to get involved with a lot of the international negotiations on ABS and DSI, and making sure that we respond to them in the way that we hold our internal policy. So our key objectives are to promote equity, encourage compliance within our system, strengthen the capacity of our researchers. Oh, well, yeah. Slides for everybody. Only I can see them, it's very exclusive. So we also want to have better fostered collaboration and providing models for advancing the COP16 outcomes. So as part of that, oh no. Okay, all right, we're in. Okay, so as part of our work, we've put out an ELSI, which is Ethical, Legal, Social Implications Framework. And this document is really setting out a high-level guide to our expectations around ABS and how we're responding to that. And we have the document with us. It's fresh off the press. They're over there. Feel free to grab them. And we've published this together very recently. And the intention was to make our position as the PTFI really clear about what our commitments are in regards to enhancing and stewarding information fairly and responsibly. So you can feel free to go and read that. I won't get too much into the weeds of it today. Okay, we've also put out a suite of documents. So aside from our overview framework, we also have a whole bunch of documents. So we have our principles for compliance. We also have an ABS compliance form for all of our users to use when they're engaging with communities. We also have a metadata collection notice, so disclosing our rights and responsibilities as data holders. And also we have protocols around free, prior, informed consent, as well as our standard material transfer agreement. So these are standard across all of our centers of excellence, so that internationally we have one standard of how we're engaging in a way that's fair and equitable. We're also happy to share these documents if any of you want to take a look at them. All right. So we're generating open data, and part of that open data contains a bit of traditional knowledge use and about Indigenous foods. So we really wanted to make sure that we're acknowledging source communities properly. And so when submitters are putting their data into our system, they have to include, or if they're including Indigenous and traditional knowledge materials, then they should be using the local context notices as well. So it's about having the right kinds of attribution. So we've also been looking at our framework for protection and recognition of Indigenous data and traditional knowledge. Now, I just want to be clear about the distinction between that for our system. So traditional knowledge for us is that kind of information that Indigenous peoples hold about our lands, waters, and territories. And then data, as Lydia would have said yesterday, was all of the information that is held about our lands, waters, and territories. So we hold a bit of both, and so we need to have clear protocols in place for both of them. So I'll give you a quick example. Kawakawa is a New Zealand culturally significant species. It's used for anti-inflammatory purposes. And our traditional knowledge about it is where it comes from and the different uses that it has and the different ways of extracting the parts that are really useful out of it. And then the Indigenous data would be the sequencing information and the part of the genetic sequence that makes it anti-inflammatory. So in relation to both, we want to have clear expectations around how we're handling it. So I won't get too into the weeds about this either, but we want to understand how each of these two different things are treated in relation to each of these different levels that you would have seen on the last slide. So authority, access, authorship, attribution, and acknowledgement. And really, as you would have seen on the last slide, there's a pyramid here. No. Oh my goodness. Okay. You know, we're doing great. I've pressed the button so many times, I don't even know where we're going to end up. Okay. Okay, I've got to give up on that for a little while. We're back. Okay. So you'll see on the bottom, acknowledgement for us is the base. So that's really where we start. So it starts with acknowledging our communities. And from there, we work up on having the proper attribution, giving authorship credit where it is due, making sure that our access protocols are clear and understandable, and then also making sure that Indigenous authority is embedded within our system. I'm not going to read these out, but we also have a set of statements. So this one is about traditional knowledge holders and recognizing their rights and our rights and responsibility as PTFI to be working with them and recognizing their rights within our system. And then the next one also is about specifically about Indigenous peoples' data sovereignty. So feel free to take photos of them. I'm not going to read them out, but they're just really setting clear expectations of our users as well as our data submitters about how we want to recognize Indigenous peoples within our data set. So going forward, this is a fairly new collaboration. So we're starting to get PTFI on the hub, and then we're looking at what else can we do. So we're going to be training our entire team to make sure we're all on the same page about local context and how to use it, as well as using local context in a public-facing way. And then also we're looking at our partner integration. So where is the data that we're using being held? How are we looking after it? How are we stewarding it correctly? And then also we're having an advisory committee put together to advise on Indigenous data sovereignty for our system. And then also we're doing integration assistance with the local context team. So really making sure we know how to go about applying the labels and notices. And then also supporting the development of our best practices. So thank you so much for your attention. The PTFI and local context have both brought me here today, so I'm really grateful for that. And they've been working really hard on this. We've been working really hard to stay on top of all that's happening internationally and making sure that we apply that in a way that makes us kind of trailblazers. We really want to be leaders in this space, and we really want to inspire and encourage other data holders and data users to be able to do the right thing in a fair and equitable way. And you know what? It's cool. It was the last slide anyway. So yeah, come chat with us anytime this week. We've got our ABS guide there, and we've also got our poster with our presentation. So please come and chat to us anytime. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for attending, everybody. It's so nice to be here in really good company. I'm so used to starting these conversations from scratch. What is colonialism? Why does Indigenous data sovereignty matter? And it's nice being able to jump in right where you all are at right now. So my name is Danny. I work at the University of Calgary as a postdoctoral fellow. I'm Métis from Manitoba, so settler on my dad's side. And the last probably 5 years, I've been working on setting up insect monitoring with Inuit in the Canadian Arctic. So I'm going to tell a little story about how we set up this project, how we're managing data. There's a lot to be said about this project. I do not have time, so I'd be grateful to talk to anybody after if you have any specific questions. So I realize the Canadian Arctic is very far from here. So I'm going to describe a little bit about the local context of how I work with Inuit in Canada. So the territory of Nunavut is outlined in red. It was established in 1991, so it's kind of a big territory, but it's also a modern day land claim agreement between the Inuit, who are the traditional stewards of those lands, and the Canadian government. So they fought for decades and decades to create this territory in which they can self-govern and have access to the resources that occur in. For scale, it's over 2 million kilometers squared. It's enormous. It's over 20% of the land in Canada, which we already know is a really big place. But despite the land mass, there is less than 40,000 people that live there. And 86% of those folks are Indigenous. All of Nunavut are Arctic environments, so they have sub, low, and high Arctic. I work in the western part of Nunavut. It's called the Kitikmeot region. It's in orange here. Their partners are called hunter-trapper organizations. I'm going to be referring to them as HTOs. HTOs are made up of all Inuit board members and staff. They are elected by the local community. They're all harvesters and hunters. Their priority as an organization is to locally manage resources. I put resources in quotations because it's a colonial term. They also have input into resource management in their communities, but also at the regional, territorial, and federal level. So they're important. They're boots on the ground, and they're really important partners for people like me. These 4 boxes are the 4 communities that we are partnered with right now. So one of my main jobs right now is liaising with the communities. Inuits are the most researched population on the planet, and we haven't been very good at listening to them. So the Inuit across the world have come together and put together research protocols for people like me to follow. So Be Fair and Care principles are really important globally. Inuit have created protocols specific to them and their time. So one really awesome paper is by Peterson et al. It was released 5 years ago. They combine, it's a type of braiding knowledge specific to the North. So it's Western science and Inuit Kayatuyakanit, which is Inuit way of life, societal law, and values. It was a group of youth actually that came together across the territory. They asked themselves, if research were up to us, what would we focus on? And so they published an academic paper, because that's where people like me look for information. And they wrote out 45 recommendations for people like me, how to respectfully work in their territory. There's also the Nunavut Research Institute. They came out with a really, really cool strategy to make sure that any research occurring in their territory is meaningful and beneficial to communities. It encourages self-determination. It helps hopefully mitigate historical exploitation. It has not stopped though. It's pretty rampant in the North still. So the research program that I work on biting insects, which are very unpopular in Northern Canada. They are really, really, really bad and prolific. So people generally, there's a culture of fear around insects, yet people understand how important they are to their ecosystems and also to the food that they rely on for sustenance. Like many students, I was shipped up to the North without any communication with local people. And I spent several years doing that, feeling kind of strange about it, but without support from the people around me to connect better with community. So finally, after several years, I sat down with these hunter-trapper organizations and I finally said, here's what I study, what's going on, because things look kind of crazy right now. And they very quickly told me the vast amount of concerns that they had. It wasn't just the biting insects, but they could see exactly how interconnected the insects are with the environment and how it affects them as people and them culturally as well. So they essentially asked us, can you please investigate the relationships between the biting insects, diseases they may carry, and the food that we rely on? A little bit more scientific context, because the Canadian North is difficult to access, not many Southern scientists have done a lot of work up there. So we know climate is changing 4 times faster up there than anybody else. We don't really know how biting insects are responding to that. One really good example, so we've got black flies. There's actually non-biting species in the Arctic, but a lot of them do bite. There's 5 species historically. By 2010, there was 14 on this one island. And now we have no clue what's going on. So that's part of our job right now, is to figure out which species are present and which ones can cause disease. Of course, we're also working with spend time on the land, and they are sharing with us observations, knowledge, and I hesitate to use the word traditional knowledge exclusively. That implies that it's not a living knowledge. They do have contemporary knowledge as well. So these are all really large cogs in the wheel of this research project. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. I'm going to walk you through this, try to pay attention to just the big red boxes. So funding structure, one of the big things in the Canadian North is Inuit want more control of money. The Southern institutions that hold funding typically keep all the money to themselves. It doesn't benefit. So one really cool funding source in the Canadian context is this Canadian federal agency. I authored applications for these two organizations, successful. So each of them pulled $600,000 in their hire locals, focus on youth. We have 2 local project coordinators. The money almost exclusively stays in the north. There's about $30,000 that gets sent elsewhere, but all of the rest of it stays. Because they hold the funding themselves, there's no question who owns the data. So if I want to use the information from their study, even though I set up the project for them, I need explicit permission to use their data for any reason. This is actually where I work right now. This is the payroll that I'm on. And through this funding, we have hired 5 Inuit youth. They're being trained on a number of field techniques. And we also have an Inuit Advisory Council that we're going to be meeting with twice a year. And our data agreements for this funding, those are being written by lawyers. So we have lawyers at the university. We also paid for lawyers for the community organizations in the Arctic so that they are not at a disadvantage and they're not sending paperwork they don't understand. Okay, this is also going to be a lot, but I'm going to have you focus on the titles up here. So when I was thinking about data research management, in Canada, many First Nations and Inuit do not like the word data for their information. They find that it demeans from its importance. So I had to think about what kind of information are we collecting as part of this work. So we have physical collections. We also have things like strands of DNA that, thank you, we didn't take account for. We have all kinds of ethics for different information. We have to think about where things are being stored, who has access to what. These are all password protected, secure online repositories. And then we have long-term storage. Who has access to that? What kind of levels of security are our partners comfortable with, depending on what kind of information we're dealing with? Okay, I'm running out of time, but we have a pipeline of information where samples move from the north, where they're collected by Indigenous youth. There's a team of students at the University of Calgary that do DNA sequencing. We're also working on genomic training for Inuit youth so that the samples stay in the north. This is really glossing over the significant amount of communication we do. We use this Indigenous knowledge sharing application called Siku. It was created by Inuit for Inuit. It's really, really cool. I wish I had more time to talk about it. I also go to community twice a year to sit down with their boards and talk about the research. And again, this is a lot of information, but our lab group has significant connections with every level of governance, whether it's local Indigenous organizations, whether it's territorial, federal, the people who make the decisions for conservations for species at risk. So our information that we generate from the ground moves through every level of government so that they can make meaningful policy decisions. And I just wanted to end off with some really cool pictures from the field last year. This is what it looks like when you're out there. You're covered in mosquitoes. These are some of the youth that we had. We worked in 4 different communities this year. A black fly that I caught, and some really beautiful river systems. And yeah, okay, some references and some views to the funding and our partners. So.
All right. Yeah, I'm terrified of this, but I should say everybody's doing so well in their presentations and handling the technical difficulties. Okay, so thank you very much for having me and for choosing to listen to my presentation today. I'm very excited to be here and to bring some stories, Nova Scotia to beautiful. Well, I should introduce myself. I'm Jemana. I'm a graduate of the Masters of Marine Management program at Dalhousie University, and I'm continuing to work there as a research associate. So today I will be providing an overview of some of my master's work that looks at the representation of place-based knowledge systems in decision support tools in the context of spatial planning in Nova Scotia, which is a mouthful, but you know what? We'll get into it. We'll get into it. So, me too. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to. Okay, nobody look, nobody look, nobody look. Okay, geographically place the work. I'm sweeping us. This is a video. Could you click play, please? I'm sweeping us from the eastern branch. Oh, I want to use this. The eastern branch of the Andean mountains in Bogota to which sits on the Atlantic coast of Canada. Oh, perfect. I invite you to the rocky shores and the rolling landscapes, which are the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who have lived with the seas for thousands of years and since the beginning of time. I invite you to the coasts where hunters and trappers, harvesters, coasts have history and beauty, and now also have growing pressures from climate change, from the dynamic and socioeconomic priorities in the area, which are ever dynamic, they're ever changing, and from the diverse and at times very competing use of space. These lands are also a source of knowledge. This coastal resident talks about how the land and sea have imprinted on them, and our conversations shed light on their inability to see themselves in the decisions being made for them and the decisions being made around them. Decisions or plans made to distribute coastal activities, whether it be means of access for fishing vessels, plans for residential and industrial development, or even opportunities for conservation, all being decided without the adequate inclusion of place-based knowledge. The coasts of Nova Scotia, not unlike the coasts around the world, require truly informed spatial planning. And despite being particularly place-specific planning approach, the spatial planning process does not comprehensively represent place-based knowledge systems. The process needs meaningful integration of different ways of knowing, like Indigenous and local knowledge. And these are knowledge systems that are site-specific, shaped by their geographies, and generated through long-standing and intergenerational relationships and connections with place. It's these points that made me curious to learn about a selection of decision support tools that I refer to as data representation tools, and their ability to capture and communicate place-based knowledge in a way that best serves coastal users by translating contextual knowledge for Nova Scotians planners and researchers so that knowledge and data and information can inform decisions. So what are decision tools? These are decision support tools that describe methods and are meant to convey scientific and social dynamic information in a way that enhances communication and makes data understandable for diverse audiences. It's all very promising, but are they in fact doing it? So I looked into this question and focused on a selection of 6 tools. The first one being the Marine Atlas, which is specifically the Canada Marine Planning Atlas, which was developed by the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans and is an online interactive mapping tool that brings together and showcases geospatial data from sources. Next is participatory mapping, which is a collaborative method of spatial knowledge generation that typically involves the engagement of local community members. I also looked into ArcGIS story mapping, and specifically the Living with the Seafloor story map, which is an online interactive platform that's geographically focused in the Eastern Shore region of Nova Scotia and offers multiple ways to represent or present data with the use of combined use of GIS map layers, video, text, and even audio. Ooh, I didn't do it. Okay. Just all getting ahead of ourselves, that's all. I also looked at, maybe we'll see. Oh, this is painful. Okay, we looked at, Marine Atlas, participatory mapping, the story map, Mark Sand. Did I talk about Marston? No. Marston is a modeling program that simulates spatial and environmental scenarios. So I looked at that example as well as gameplay. And specifically, I looked at the marine spatial planning board game, which is an educational activity that's meant to reproduce the marine spatial process and the complexities that are involved in it through gameplay. And finally, I looked at virtual reality. Offers computer-generated environments that allow people to interact with a space three-dimensionally through specialized equipment. So these tools were selected based on their current or well-suited potential use in the spatial planning process in Nova Scotia. They were also chosen based on their alignment to Canada's Oceans Act and their capacity to use and combine visual techniques and contextual knowledge. So again, ooh, you're hearing all the sounds I make. I'm so sorry. Okay, perfect. So just to remind everybody, what I'm hoping to understand from a deeper look into these tools are the characteristics that make them useful in capturing and communicating place-based knowledge in Nova Scotia and really humanizing data in this process. So how I went about doing this is with a scoping review done to develop a broader understanding, use of data representation tools in spatial planning. And this was coupled with semi-structured interviews. And here I took a purposive sampling approach to speak with participants that self-identified as belonging to one of three participant groups. The first group being coastal users, who were defined as those who have experience living and working in areas subjected to spatial planning, and whose primary perspective is that of a resident, a user, or protector of an area. The second group were researchers who investigate the relationship between space, people, and activities. And the third group were planners, who are individuals that work to develop spatial plans. So moving on to some of the results. Oh yes, I included this quote to showcase the importance of thoughtful design and application of data representation tools, especially as it relates to space knowledge. This planner, highlighting risk of tools, flattening out complexities involved in local knowledge. Details can be lost in translation. So this graph is helpful to show that there are many specific ways to apply decision support tools and data representation tools specifically in order to engage with and communicate place-based knowledge. For example, ArcGIS Story Map, which is the third section from your left, was generally thought on participants to be not to be used in data collection or even was a favorite in stages of data. And participatory mapping, decision support tool was seen to do well in all three categories of the generalized stages of the spatial process. So it's tools like ArcGIS story maps and participatory mapping that allow for interaction and storytelling and the integration of multiple perspectives and objectives. It really brings life to data points and can bridge technical data and lived experiences. And okay, yeah, there's one more point. And this conscious effort to see people behind data is what really works to amplify place-based knowledge. And after speaking with some of those people behind the data and those who work so closely with data, we came up with a list of characteristics of tools, make them effective in engaging with communicating place-based knowledge systems. The first thing for a tool should be is usable, in that the tool is not limited by available technology. It's accessible in terms of format and language, and the intention for the data collection or the use of the tool is made clear given context with its use. So people aren't guessing why we're using it and what it's going to be used for. A tool should be familiar and does not require the extension of one's comfortability or the need for someone to have extensive background knowledge or previous experience in navigating something. A tool should be narrative and comprehensively capture and share stories through text, graphics, imagery, video, and audio, or a combination of all of those things, really just to ensure that it's being communicative and the message is maintaining its original meaning. A tool has to be collaborative and facilitate the involvement and share stories through text, as I mentioned in the narrative portion, but also to be able to integrate multiple perspectives and objectives. A tool should be interactive in that it hosts an interface that promotes visual and even physical engagement to promote learning. And finally, a tool should be participatory in that it supports a deeper understanding through active participation. So not to best use existing tools or to thoughtfully design or redesign decision support techniques in the spatial planning process, you require collaboration. But what does collaboration mean in the context of spatial planning? Of course, collaboration looks different for everyone, but to even begin to answer that question, you have to value knowledge. That's something I think we're all here looking to do today. We have to value knowledge and we have to value those sharing knowledge. When it comes to the design and the use of decision support tools, we have to prioritize inclusivity and accessibility. For example, ensuring accessible formats and the use of compatible and understandable. And all of this is really meant to foster meaningful participation, meaningful partnerships, and data generation and data sharing. Because we can't really do anything well without working with the strengths of different knowledge systems, sharing decision-making power, and ensuring that tools supporting those decisions are representative of people. And then I'm done, and I want to thank you all and thank everybody who supported this work. And I don't know if you caught a glimpse of my email was on there, so feel free to connect with me that way. Okay.
So let's do,
Hola, buenas tardes. Bien. Yo vengo hoy a contarles sobre el tema de monitoreo de derechos para la vida. Camilo Niño y también estoy en este escenario. Pero tengo como secretario técnico de la Comisión Nacional. No somos una organización como tal, sino convergen y están varias organizaciones indígenas que hacen parte de Colombia, las principales a nivel nacional. Estamos representando 115 pueblos indígenas a nivel nacional y lo que buscamos es el diálogo entre el gobierno nacional y los pueblos indígenas reglada por un decreto que es el decreto 1397 de 1900. Nuestro tema, territorio con enfoque de derecho. Cuando se estaba eso tuvimos dos metas que para nosotros eran muy importantes, la meta 22 y la meta 3, que hablaba específicamente de territorios indígenas. Y algo que nos gustaba era que se debía, uno, respetar las culturas, sus derechos sobre las tierras, los territorios y los recursos, y los conocimientos tradicionales. A nivel interno, nosotros discutimos este indicador de cabecera, que es el cambio de uso de la tierra y tenencia de la tierra en los territorios de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, desde nuestra lucha histórica de los pueblos indígenas en Colombia, siempre va a estar la exigibilidad política y jurídica en el marco de fortalecer los procesos de los territorios. Y esto tiene que estar en marco en la garantía de los derechos territoriales fundamentales de los pueblos indígenas. En ese sentido, nosotros como escenario creamos en ese diálogo con el gobierno nacional un sistema de información geográfica indígena que tiene aproximadamente, va a cumplir 12 años de discusión y es un sistema único en Latinoamérica. Y digo único en Latinoamérica porque fue un sistema creado por el gobierno nacional, pero administrada por nosotros. Es decir, que toda la información que vamos subiendo es de autonomía y administración nuestra, con servidores nuestros. Y en este momento tiene más de 112 capas de información en materia territorial. Y sobre todo hacemos énfasis en los territorios indígenas. Sería importante que aquí se pueda ingresar en el código QR. Sin embargo, para Colombia, todo esto son los territorios en figura de resguardos indígenas, que es la manera en que en Colombia se está reconociendo la titulación, la tenencia colectiva o formalizándolo, y el 30% del territorio nacional hoy está titulado a los pueblos indígenas con resoluciones. Y estamos hablando del 30%, lo manifestaba. Sin embargo, toda esta zona de café aún no se ha podido resolver. Estos datos que están aquí de 1.342 solicitudes que no ha podido resolver todavía el Estado colombiano, solamente contamos con 500 áreas especializadas que equivale más o menos a 3.33 millones de hectáreas. Y tenemos muchos territorios indígenas, estamos hablando de ancestrales, como es Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, Orinoquía, que no se han identificado. Quiere decir entonces que para Colombia aún existe una deuda histórica en materia de identificación de los territorios indígenas. Nosotros, con este sistema de información, buscamos también mostrar que Colombia es uno de los países donde la violencia ha exacerbado y ha aumentado la violación de derechos humanos. Montamos un sistema que va con nexo interoperable con nuestro sistema de información geográfica y lo que buscamos sistematizar es hechos de violencia sociopolítica contra personas de las comunidades y pueblos indígenas en Colombia. Y lo estamos alimentando periódicamente con información que llegan desde los territorios, como también por información secundaria. Nosotros venimos registrando casos de violencia contra pueblos indígenas a partir de la firma del acuerdo de paz. Y este es el resultado que ustedes pueden ver. 282 agresiones contra 2.372 defensores indígenas, 186 han sido asesinados, 218 víctimas mortales, 96 amenazas de secuestro, tortura, y un dato es, desde que se firmó el acuerdo de paz en Colombia, hasta la fecha van 539 asesinatos a pueblos indígenas. Algo que les quiero mostrar en esto es que en los territorios donde existe mayor incertidumbre jurídica es donde hay mayores asesinatos. Y estamos hablando de Cauca, y estamos hablando del Putumayo, de Nariño, del Pacífico colombiano y un poco de La Guajira. Entonces, los sistemas de información, cuando estamos hablando de los sistemas de información indígena, no lo estamos hablando como insumos, sino que son las bases que nos permite para medir justicia y que va sustentado entre la autonomía, el gobierno propio y la defensa de derechos humanos que transforman la información. Entonces, nosotros hicimos un cruce de información que procesamos 33 millones de datos de registro biológico que tiene Colombia y se identificó que el 20% de esta información está en territorios indígenas de registro biológico y que muchos de esos datos que están en peligro de extinción está también en territorios indígenas. Lo que aquí empezamos a mostrar es cómo el tema de biodiversidad en el marco de especies empieza a jugar un papel fundamental frente a los territorios indígenas. Sin embargo, también identificamos que es necesario esto que se ve aquí, que son solicitudes que no se han podido garantizar su seguridad jurídica, empieza a crear conexiones entre territorios indígenas que finalmente debe impactar en la conservación de las especies. Por eso hoy Colombia estamos empezando a trabajar en protección, en protocolos para la protección de datos y manejo y uso de datos. Entonces, para concluir, tenemos un escenario donde los pueblos indígenas estamos debatiendo temas que tienen que ver con territorios indígenas. Tenemos una oportunidad frente a los desafíos y compromisos que tiene el gobierno nacional que se ha firmado en las metas globales y tenemos oportunidades de avanzar en la protección de los territorios indígenas como un mecanismo de la protección de la biodiversidad que juega Colombia. Todo estos, todo estos, todas estas áreas que están aquí, el 50% del territorio nacional en Colombia hoy es bosque. Conexa también a muchos ecosistemas estratégicos donde existen páramos y, por supuesto, otros bosques que están en vía de extinción. Por eso, desde Colombia estamos diciendo es que proteger los territorios es proteger la vida y en el marco de un país, como lo mostraba, está marcado aún por el tema de violencia. Muchas gracias. Hola.
Bueno, voy a reformular la pregunta. Teniendo en cuenta como que esta mañana veíamos que una forma de localizar los datos que se han colectado en territorio indígena era a través de unas etiquetas. ¿Ustedes qué expectativas tienen en ese sentido con los datos sobre la biodiversidad? ¿Quisieran proponer un sistema de datos de biodiversidad, así como este sistema geográfico? ¿O sienten que esta propuesta de etiquetas ya sería un gran paso para ustedes para poder encontrar y localizar en dónde se encuentra esa información? ¿Sí se entiende la pregunta? O digamos en términos de localizar esa información que ya se ha recogido en los territorios y que está como en repositorios, en museos, en bases de datos sobre biodiversidad.
Bueno, Colombia, a diferencia de muchos países, tiene escenario de diálogo y de concertación. Hemos venido, que nace también dentro de las exigencias de luchas históricas de los pueblos, como esta de territorio, como escenario donde estamos discutiendo el tema de la política, de diferentes políticas. De esa manera, nosotros estamos convencidos que el Estado colombiano tendrá que sentarse a dialogar con nosotros, conocer un poco qué implica y qué representa esto, pero sobre todo lo que estamos viendo es cómo estos sistemas nuestros propios empiezan a ser una herramienta útil para hablar sobre la importancia de los pueblos indígenas, sus territorios y las oportunidades frente a los desafíos actuales. Nosotros estamos convencidos que este sistema que tenemos va a servir para un tema de monitoreo, de reporte, que seamos también una fuente de información frente a los compromisos globales. Por eso, al existir estos escenarios, Colombia tiene esa oportunidad de dialogarlo y, por supuesto, de construir de manera conjunta. Estamos buscando también tener soberanía sobre los datos y manejo de información. Nosotros tenemos varios sistemas que son sistemas propios que hemos creado y estamos convencidos que el uso de la información y manejo también hace parte de la soberanía.
Okay. I'm Jean Ganglo from the University of Abomey Calavi. My question is, let's say, on all the presentation, right? All the presentation.
Katie, feel free to move up front. Start up.
Okay. So I thank you very much for your presentation. I'm quite impressed, okay, and very proud of you and also the work you are doing to raise, let's say, the visibility of indigenous people by publishing their data, by defending also their rights. Those people are generally vulnerable, and it is why I'm quite proud of you. My interest is to join you, okay, and also work with people of my country, indigenous people, so as to do what you are doing, say, raise their visibility, defend their interests also, publish their data. I'm also node manager of GPPNIN, and see on, let's say, that large repository of data, which is, let's say, GBIF, Global Biodiversity Information Facility. I will be very happy, proud to work with you. Thank you.
The questions? Questions?
Gracias. Voy a hacer la pregunta en español porque quisiera hacerla para Camilo. Soy Patricia Kolev de México y dijiste que están representando a 115 pueblos, lo cual es diferente de otros casos que vimos hoy. ¿Cómo consiguen? Yo sé que en México también se hacen muchas asambleas, etcétera, pero ustedes, ¿cuáles son los desafíos y diferencias que tienen para alcanzar esos acuerdos? Porque siendo tantos pueblos con quizá diferentes territorios, los intereses pueden variar para justamente poder tener una gobernanza en el manejo de sus recursos. ¿Cuál crees que sería el desafío más grande que enfrentan?
Lo primero es, en Colombia, una de las bases que tenemos es los pueblos indígenas, todos Estamos por la importancia que revisten los territorios indígenas, por la gobernanza, por la autonomía. Hoy Colombia tiene un enorme desafío frente al avance de la seguridad de la tenencia política. Estábamos hablando de 1.300 solicitudes. Y esas 1.300 solicitudes están en todo el territorio nacional, todo el territorio. Por lo tanto, la lucha histórica de los territorios de los pueblos indígenas es algo común que tenemos. Y este escenario se encarga de buscar regular las normas sobre los procedimientos. Entonces, esta es una plataforma que busca o que reúne organizaciones nacionales. Y esas organizaciones nacionales, a su vez, tienen organizaciones sociales, regionales y locales. Entonces, buscamos de esa manera conectarnos, pero lo que nos conecta a nosotros es el territorio. Entonces, una norma que nosotros discutamos con el gobierno nacional impacta en todo el territorio nacional. Entonces, por ejemplo, hoy estamos discutiendo una norma que tiene que ver con la identificación de los territorios indígenas. ¿Qué es eso? Eso es, Colombia tiene mucha información, exageradamente información de datos sobre todo. Pero cuando a ti te preguntan dónde están los territorios indígenas, no tiene ese tipo de información y sobre eso se están tomando decisiones. Entonces, ese ha sido como una de las experiencias, creo que es casi típico de Colombia, que existen espacios que se han creado de diálogo con el gobierno nacional, donde estamos construyendo política pública con el gobierno nacional. Esa es una experiencia que tenemos y ahí convergemos. Por eso este no es una organización. Representamos pueblos indígenas porque somos pueblos indígenas. Todos nuestros delegados son pueblos indígenas. Pero si impactamos, efectivamente, eso, por supuesto, los pueblos indígenas a nivel regional tienen su autonomía, tienen su gobernanza, pero tenemos puntos en común en el que estamos discutiendo. Un punto, por ejemplo, nosotros discutimos con el gobierno nacional los temas que tienen que ver con el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo de un gobierno. Y sobre eso, el gobierno trabaja el cuatrenio. Entonces, esa es un poco como la experiencia que tenemos. Tal vez podamos conversar más.
Yo hablo en español para preguntarle a él. Yo hago parte de la serranía del Perijá, del departamento del Cesar. Yo vi que tú mostraste ahí que todavía no los han identificado, pero nosotros tenemos un inconveniente, que los yutpas son colombo-venezolanos. Entonces tú dices nomás que el territorio de Colombia. Debes tener en cuenta también cómo se va a trabajar con ellos, porque ellos están perjudicándonos en el sentido del tema de los campesinos, porque ellos dicen que todo lo que es de la carretera negra para arriba es territorio de ellos. Y si ellos vienen de Venezuela, porque anteriormente los de la serranía del Perijá se conocían como motilones, y ya los motilones ya cambiaron de razón social, ahora son yutpa. Entonces explícame eso, por favor.
Sí, lo primero es, los hermanos motilones son los barí, es otro pueblo. Y los yupas son otro pueblo. Son dos diferentes. Entonces, los motilones son los que están por el Catatumbo, que creo que el Catatumbo ha tenido su experiencia, pero los yupa son otro pueblo. Efectivamente, cuando hacíamos la presentación, soy de Colombia, pues hablo de Colombia. Efectivamente, existen pueblos binacionales, que son todo lo que son fronterizos, desde la Guajira, los Guayú, los Sicuani, por Arauca, y efectivamente con los pueblos que tienen que ver con Ecuador, Perú y Brasil, que son fronterizos. Por supuesto, también tenemos con Panamá. Ahora, en ese desafío nosotros tenemos una experiencia, por ejemplo, con la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, donde yo soy, donde todo el territorio ha sido reconocido como territorio ancestral, 1.700.000 hectáreas. Pero eso no quiere decir entonces que si bien yo digo que yo soy de la sierra y está reconocida bajo un decreto, entonces los hermanos que están ahí, que no son indígenas, no tengan sus derechos. Eso ya ha sido resuelto un poco. Y eso siento que son los desafíos en este tema de interculturalidad que tenemos a nivel de Colombia, pero de la sierra es igual. Yo digo, tenemos nuestro territorio ancestral, pero ahí están otros hermanos. Allá hay campesinos, empresarios, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces, no le estoy hablando no hablé de Venezuela porque soy colombiano, pero en esos pueblos fronterizos aún existen esos desafíos de la binacionalidad. No sé de dónde eres, Colombia. De Codazzi y Cesar, Serranía del Peña. Entonces, esos son los desafíos en la interculturalidad que tenemos, pero aquí es la oportunidad cuando decíamos el tema de la protección de la misma biodiversidad del que hoy nos está dando, frente a los datos y frente a la conectividad existente que fue el que yo nombré.
Boa tarde. Não é uma pergunta, mas para dizer que a apresentação do colega final, né, vem muito a calhar com o que a gente está fazendo aqui hoje. Nós somos de comunidades, de povos e comunidades tradicionais do Brasil, conhecida pela normativa da OIT 169 como povos locais, comunidades locais, e dizer que a apresentação dele, nós nos enxergamos na apresentação do colega, né? E aí a gente está no Brasil criando uma plataforma onde iremos mapear os conhecimentos associados à biodiversidade, mas não queremos somente uma plataforma onde vá acumular dados, né? Nós queremos uma plataforma onde esses dados irão servir para direcionamento de políticas públicas, né, e principalmente a garantia dos territórios dos povos e comunidades tradicionais do Brasil. Obrigada.
I have a question, but I'm going to speak in Spanish, sorry, but this question is for all of you. He estado escuchando mucho de las ventajas que tiene el compartir los datos, sin duda es muy importante. Este evento es el objetivo principal, pero me preocupa mucho que aquí se habla de compartir los datos, proteger los datos para las comunidades, claro, pero son datos abiertos y a la vez el número de patentes por compañías que están buscando microorganismos, por ejemplo, que están de moda los microorganismos, pero lo hacen con todas las especies y los genes que son importantes, pues el número de patentes ha venido incrementando de manera exponencial y a mí me preocupa un poco, como que no he escuchado mucho hablar de esto aquí, tal vez excepto la segunda compañera que está ahí. Quisiera que me contaran, incluso ustedes, sobre un poco sobre una reflexión sobre este tema.
Hopefully I understood the translation right, but you're asking about the patenting of Indigenous data. And I think this is definitely an issue that we need to talk about a bit more. as we've seen at the World Intellectual Property Organization with the new Treaty on Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge, we are starting to see that there is an international push towards further recognition of the use of Indigenous knowledge. But does disclosure then mean that our rights are recognized and that they are enforced? Not necessarily. So I think slowly over time, we are starting to see a push towards disclosure. And hopefully over time, that will turn into better recognition of our rights, especially under the Nagoya Protocol and things like that. But yeah, I definitely think it's a topic that we need to discuss more, especially within the intellectual property route, because intellectual property is a Western legal system that is not built to conceptualize Indigenous notions of ownership and knowledge transfer and the way that we as Indigenous peoples hold our data. So by having tools such as local contexts, where they're not a legal tool, but they're an extra legal tool, it's another form of protection where if we can't find our rights being protected in traditional intellectual property law, then we need to find other protections through things like contracts and free prior informed consent enforcement and material MAT, material transfer agreements and mutually agreed terms. So they're talking about that a lot at the CBD, and I think over time they will hopefully be more enforceable. But at the moment, a lot of these systems are voluntary. So I think as long as we keep pushing and keep saying, you know, hey, you need to recognize our rights, over time it will get better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is, this is actually one of the key issues in talking about data sovereignty and the control over data. Is it only gets you a certain way along the path, and it's really about trying to make sure that as the data is being collected, and particularly when, like, if you're in a situation like, say, with the Inuit, where they were controlling the data, and they sort of they have the sort of the ownership and the possession of it, and they control how that happens. Most other situations, it's sitting with the research organization or a company or an open space, and you don't have that. So the whole idea around labeling it is to just create some transparency in the system, so that when it hits that point where it might become a commercial product, there's a way that people can look at it and say, hey, have you acted in the right way? There's no legal protections unless the country starts to put some legislation in place. So, working through GBIF and places like this is about trying to at least create some transparency around where those rights exist, cultural rights exist, so that they might be able to be implemented in the future. Okay.
Thanks very much. Just, I guess, following from that, to what extent can the labels, the traditional knowledge and biocultural labels, maybe this is for some of you, but also the local context folks particularly, can they, I guess, maybe go beyond asserting rights and encouraging good behavior to promote certain kinds of investment? I'm fairly new to this field, but I'm really seeing the volume of investment of funds that's going into the global bioeconomy. It's really enormous and growing rapidly. And much of that, I can't imagine would ever serve Indigenous or other local communities' interests, but presumably much of it can. And is it realistic? Is it worthwhile? Is it the kind of thing in the biocultural collaboration label that is intended to say, okay, we've got knowledge about this particular species. Our knowledge we associate with the durability of the material or a particular nutritional quality, something like that. Is that, apologize, I'm not kind of rambling here a bit, but going beyond just these are our rights and we expect you to protect.
Okay. Yeah. So that was, and the reason the biocultural labels was put together was exactly for these instances. And the situation has become more complicated recently, in the sense that when the access and benefit sharing agreements were put in place, and having free prior informed consent, It was that you were working directly with the company, and it was a direct relationship, so you could work out, mutually agreed terms. It's become more complicated as everything's moved into open data spaces, because you'll be a part of a project like maybe the insect monitoring one, which will generate some information for research, but it will be some future user that will think about being used in that way. And there's nothing that kind of the researchers do about that in that sense, other than try and kind of working with the community around where that sits. So I think that's where we're trying to think about where that comes about. They are they're educational in the sense, as Katie said, they're extra legal, but they can inform legal processes, and they can inform hopefully transitions from a research space into a commercial arrangement, which then has a contractual element to it and can then think about mutually agreed terms with communities. So we're sort of trying to create that sort of possibility. The thing that may be closest to sort of enforcement is under the new sort of WIPO treaty, patent officers are going to have to, or companies will have to make disclosures around products that they've developed. And if a patent office can then go and check, say, a database and find that there's a label associated with a particular gene sequencer again, then at least they can go back and ask the company, hey, we've seen this, what did you do about it? So it's probably a little bit loose in that sense, and definitely not the kind of like the strength and certainty that Indigenous communities are looking for in these sorts of spaces, but it's a sort of a step in the right direction.
I was ask espanhol, sorry. About sobre esta questão de las notificações e los selos, los labels, não têm poder legal, pero uma coisa que não vejo nadie falar é a licença que temos CC by NC no comércio. Por que não resgatamos isto e ponemos uma força para que isto valha realmente, e isto entre como um metadato para uso não comercial, e que se haga isso, porque isto é possível, não? Alguém sabe responder?
She was asking about regarding that labels and notices not having any judicial enforcement. Kayla was bringing back the existence of non-commercial licenses, data use licenses. And why don't we use and enforce these licenses in traditional and local data sets so communities can impose that they do not wish that their data and knowledge to be commercially used?
Okay, all right. Great question. So one of the challenges about using licenses is that you have to be the copyright holder in the first instance. And in most instances where our knowledge is sitting, someone else is the copyright holder. So we can become copyright holders, but we don't become copyright holders of our traditional knowledge. We become copyright holders of the book that we write about it, the song that we kind of compose about it, the documentary which we make about it. And so it's sort of it's not on the traditional knowledge itself, it's on that particular representation of it. And so that's where the limitation of the license system, but in saying that, you would have seen in the presentation that Katie did, I was talking about, is that we can make use of both extra legal tools like labeling, but we can also make use of licenses if we're if we're collaborating on a project and we're a part of being the authors. So we can make use of those legal things. We can put in place kind of contracts and research agreements. So there are ways, but we just have to think about how we use all of those tools to get to the position we want to be.
I can provide a quick example of how my research was conducted. We didn't use licensing per se, but we had like our research institution had partnered with an ethics watch, and it was up like the burden of the institution to reach out to, in my case, the Confederacy of the Mainland Mi'kmaq, where my research was taking place, and they had to review the document, the proposal that we had shared, and they ensured that even like up to the questions I was asking and who I'd be reaching out to, like all that was reviewed and approved beforehand. And research cannot continue, unless you have people from the Ethics Watch. If you are involving not only Indigenous communities, but in my case, Indigenous communities, local members as well. There's if there's any perceived risk, and that can be associated with sharing personal information or maybe even causing harm to the questions you're asking, it's something that has to be brought up to the institution, I guess in the case of research, and the institution then has to deem it necessary for further review. So it's challenging when your institution isn't backing up those processes, and I don't know what to do in that case because I was lucky enough to work with Dalhousie University that works very closely with the Confederacy. But that's just another mode. I think it's something that institutions now have to take charge of and build connections with and ensure that there's review processes at multiple stages. But of course that Indigenous communities in particular are going to be the final say and are aware of every component of the work that's being done.
Another thing I would add on to what Maui said is that it's important to remember with traditional intellectual property regimes that, especially if you need to be the copyright holder, that copyright only lasts for the life of the creator plus a certain amount of years, depending on which country you live in. So if you're using an intellectual property system and you're putting copyright and licensing on top of it, when that license ends or when that copyright ends, your information ends up in the public domain, which means that anyone can use it. This is kind of complex in terms of traditional knowledge, but it is something to be aware of, the risk of using intellectual property systems to protect traditional knowledge. So if a licensing system or a copyright system works for your community, it could be a tool that you use in conjunction with local context or a set of other tools that help to enforce what you're trying to achieve.
En español. Bueno, yo soy indígena de Colombia, de un territorio de ecosistemas de páramo. Y creo que digamos, una de las ventajas que tiene Colombia, como lo mencionaba Camilo, es que ha habido un proceso de reivindicar el territorio, porque los pueblos indígenas sin territorio no existimos. Y otra ventaja, creeríamos que en esta lucha de derechos al territorio es que existe la propiedad colectiva de los territorios. A diferencia, como lo mencionaba Australia, que hay concesiones, como en algunos casos de México y Perú, que hay concesiones donde el Estado es el propietario. En Colombia existe la propiedad colectiva. En consecuencia, eso permite ejercer, garantizar y exigir derechos y reconocimientos sobre estos territorios. Y esto ha generado muchos datos. Y dentro de esos datos hay vacíos también de información en temas de biodiversidad. Algunos casos puntuales en Colombia se ha trabajado mucho de la mano con investigación propia de los territorios, no tanto de las instituciones o laboratorios o universidades en una sola vía, sino en doble vía. Y eso ha permitido dos cosas: fortalecer los sistemas propios de conocimiento tradicional, y aquí quiero mencionar que el conocimiento tradicional evoluciona conforme a las dinámicas de cambio del planeta, y esto ha permitido que el proceso de datos también evolucione, y por eso se abren estas oportunidades de articularse con todos estos procesos. La pregunta que tenía especialmente para las compañeras que expusieron, primero que todo, es cómo ven ustedes o qué mecanismos se podrían incluir para que el proceso de investigación y procesamiento de datos sea recíproco, donde los sistemas de protección y conocimiento de los pueblos indígenas también aporten metodologías, aporten herramientas de proceso de datos, como ya se ha estado dando en muchos países. Perú tiene a una institución que registra los sistemas de conocimiento tradicional y ha sido una herramienta para evitar patentes que involucran conocimientos tradicionales. Y ha sido una herramienta que ha garantizado que muchas patentes puedan ser negadas o recuperadas, y se articula con sistemas de información de conocimientos tradicionales de la India y de Australia. Hay otros países, como en caso de Colombia, donde eso todavía no tenemos, pero sin embargo, hay mucho potencial desde la investigación propia indígena que puede aportar a todas estas infraestructuras de datos que acabamos de conocer en el marco de este espacio. Entonces, no es solamente en una sola vía, sino que debe ser un proceso en doble vía. ¿Cuál sería como esa principal recomendación? Y que sea algo sistemático y no casuístico. Digamos, que no sea un caso puntual, sino que sea algo que se pueda replicar en varios escenarios. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was really interesting. If I understand this correctly, in my research context, I work in a Canadian territory that has their rights to self-governance, which is fairly unique in Canada. They have very specific things in their treaty that allow them to have a lot more control. They issue permits to people like me. They can deny me at any time. And the issue being they have such a low population that they struggle with capacity. They struggle with enforcing the rules that they've set up to keep people like me from taking advantage of them. However, the Inuit now are about to release a huge database which will hold all of the information generated in their territory, including traditional knowledge. And that release is imminent. So for now, myself as someone who's not from that territory, I have to try my best to follow the guidelines and recommendations that they release. And once they're able to set up that infrastructure for me to contribute to and for my partners to contribute to, then I think we'll be able to do what you're suggesting.
Kilda, it looks like this could go on, but we're not allowed to. We've been given the message. I just wanted to make one sort of final comment. Data sovereignty isn't an end game. Data sovereignty is just up on getting toward what people have been talking about, getting sovereignty in our territories. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind. I want to thank the speakers for their presentations. Thank you for taking that. And afternoon tea is there. There's some resources there if you want to pick it up on the way out as well. Feel free. Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. Mixer at 6:30. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, because I'm interested in so I'm hoping someone.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. No. I'll make sure I keep that in my list of things. Thursday lunchtime.